Okay, welcome, people. I can't see I can't see myself, but it doesn't matter. It's probably no great loss. But for the presentation, oh yeah, I can now see myself and my colleagues. I'm very happy to welcome you all here today, including those of you who are participating virtually. The session today is about Trust in the Smart City, which is our project. This is a project run in the Hong Kong Baptist University, but really between the Departments of Government and International Studies and the Department of Geography. It's a project that's been on for about a year, so we're mid-term. Last year we had a set of workshops. We're calling it an Impact Cafe. Now, why are we doing this? First of all, there's no coffee, so why should we call it an Impact Cafe? Well, that wasn't foreseen, to be honest. But of course, I mean, in a way, I think the Impact Cafe formula, I first came across it with my friends and colleagues in the UK, and basically the idea is that you meet in a pub, basically, usually in Britain, and you get people around to talk about the various issues of the day and to feedback on the project. And so the idea with this was that we would feedback, actually, in a very basic sense, on our survey. Because, the survey that we carried out, I'm going to take my mask off because no one can see me. Well, they probably can, but I'm the only person in the room, honestly, without a mask on. Everybody else has got a mask, if that's okay with people. And I'm socially distanced from just about everybody, I think. So let me carry on. Okay, so basically, trust in the smart city then. What we'll try and do here is, so we've said Impact Cafe, that's our project, and we're reporting back really on a survey that was carried out in March and April of this year under the title Trust in the Smart City. Now I'm going to be saying something, I think. Yeah, okay, it works. But I'm going to be passing over for most of the presentation actually you just realised the most of, to Darren and Calvin, who've been doing great work on different bits of the survey. Okay, so to start with then, Trust in the Smart City. What are we trying to do? I'll give a general sort of introduction to the project, and then we'll talk through some of the aspects that we'll try and drill down in on. Trust in the Smart City. We're trying to, in this project, interpret the linked phenomena of trust and the smart city. We're adopting a mix of primary data analysis, oral and written interviews. We did well over 20 interviews, very, very interesting. Of course, anonymous interviews, we won't say who they were with. Government documents, but most of all, I think we did a territory-wide survey conducted by PORI, the Public Opinion Research Institute. That was with a sample of about 800 or so across Hong Kong. That took place a few months ago. It's still pertinent. To be honest, we're still looking very much at it. I've got the survey here. If anybody wants to dig in on it, please feel welcome. Three headline findings, I think, really, to this survey and more generally to the project. First, I'll call it the data trust paradox. Why is there high support for technology in a low trust environment? Okay, because this is one of the things that comes out, it seems to me, of our findings. Secondly, the social impact of trust and mistrust. The findings we're going to present to you today are strongly correlated with age, political affiliation, and to a lesser degree, education. Okay. Thirdly, trust in the smart city as an epiphenomenon. In other words, is it an empty signifier for something else? And that's the third part, in a way, of the presentation today. When we're looking at trust in the smart city, are we actually looking at trust in the smart city, or are we looking at something else? Okay. Why link trust in the smart city? Well, I've been working on trust for many years, but that's not why we should link it. That would be an incredibly self-centered way of the world. But it is a very interesting and very unsettled concept. One of the most contested and nebulous concepts within contemporary academic research, arguably. As Levi says, trust is not one thing, and it does not have one source. It has a variety of forms and causes. I can't actually read the because something came on the screen, but it's okay now. Now, elsewhere in other work I've done, we define trust in terms of relationships, so interpersonal, intermediate, institutional, in terms of levels, interpersonal, social, institutional, international, in terms of properties, trustworthiness, in terms of associated concepts like resilience, risk, confidence, transparency, and then more generally in terms of public policy processes. And I've been working for the last few years with colleagues in Cardiff, mainly, in Stafford. We have a book coming out called Analysing the Trust Transparency Nexus, and it's coming out with Policy Press in Bristol, and that's coming out next year. So that's a sort of outcome of what seems to me to be years of working on this question. That particular project was very much based about multi-level governance, so it was rooted in 6 regions in France, Germany, and the UK. But this is a different thing, of course. So why link trust in the smart city? Well, the project focuses on smart city dynamics in a context of diminished public trust in Hong Kong. Now, it's not only about Hong Kong, and in fact, Calvin's paper will be mainly actually about other places other than Hong Kong. Very much there's an international framing as well, of course, to our project. But we take as the basic presupposition the idea of thin trust, okay? Thin trust that we adapt to technology. Now, the idea of thin trust is that governments can't function effectively if they don't have the trust of citizens. And they can't carry out effectively public policies or even more ambitious reform agendas if there's not at least a form of thin trust. It doesn't mean that you have to know everything about the public policy, but there has to be an underlying form of confidence in the ability, the integrity, the benevolence of decision makers to carry out policies effectively. And so essentially what we say in this project is that public acceptability is a cornerstone in a way of an effective public policy. And technology, and Darren will talk about this, represents a particular version perhaps of this thin trust. And so I won't say too much because Darren's going to come on and talk about that. And I won't even talk to this slide, but really trust and technology is at the heart of what we're trying to do today. I defer actually to the presentation of Darren because we don't want to repeat ourselves, and some of this stuff you talk about in your presentation. But essentially, just to say it, make a very, very basic distinction that Wilson Wong made the other day between trust enhancing technology and trust enabling technology. Trust enhancing technology lies in the field of public policy. It includes attributes like e-government, transparency, openness, freedom of information, and it's the operation that, the context that governments engage in to try and enhance trust. But trust enabling technology requires input by citizens. So in a smart city, the citizen has to, if there's a basic form of data mistrust, then the smart city won't work, because it relies, of course, on citizens or whatever, actually inputting data. It relies on them filling in, evaluating our lectures or booking.com or the latest hotel they've been to or whatever. So in a sense, there's a slight distinction there. We could say that basic public policy is usually the trust enhancing variety. So the whole debate about e-government, e-governance, it's usually what the governments do to try and enhance trust in technology. Okay, and that's probably the limits of public policy. But of course, in order to work, trust needs to go beyond public policy, and it needs to actually filter down to citizens themselves. So citizens need to have trust in the basic processes of the technology. So, and that's why in my more constructed way of looking at the world, that's why it's important that there are coherent narratives from government about the smart city. So there has to be a story, a coherent storyline about why it's important to have technology. Not just technology itself, but a story about technology. And in a sense, that's something I'm also working on in a different project, which I won't go into today. But essentially, it's not just technology, it's also a discourse around technology and a narrative around technology. In my paper, in my brief paper here, I briefly evoke 4 types of trust that we refer to in the survey: characteristic trust, data trust, trust in intermediaries, and trust as an epiphenomenon. Now let me just say a brief word about each of these. Firstly, characteristic trust. is characteristically too small in the PowerPoint. That's the first point I would say. And I realised that, so this is we'll put this down to age. But let me just say, just a couple of quotes really here, without going into it. We could say what we try to do in this survey is we do try and have a set of questions. Q13, it's about it's an attempt to be a question about trust in a pure form. So we ask people who they trust. Do they trust members of their family? Do they trust their friends? Do they trust their neighbours? Do they trust foreigners? Do they trust people with a different religious belief? Do they trust those who meet for the first time, and so on? It's a very interesting set of answers here, actually. We haven't yet, to be fair, we haven't really linked these answers in yet to the questions on the smart city. So I'm not going to say much more about this because, in a sense, we haven't really done that data analysis yet. And that's the next thing we have to do in terms of our analysis. So I won't say much, except to say that there are even some eyeball striking things going on. One is, if we take a simple question about trusting the government, for example, those who were born in mainland China appear to trust the government more than those who were born in Hong Kong, which was an interesting phenomenon that came out. The particular areas of mistrust appear to link into questions of generation and questions of political loyalty. Now, I'll just say that because we're going to come back to those two dimensions quite a lot throughout the course of the day. But it's just one of the slides we showed, and that's obvious when everybody trusts their family. Well, until they start getting older, you'll notice that from the over 70s, or they trust their family a lot less, really. But maybe that's understandable. So you start off by trusting your family, and then you have a bit of a doubt in your 30s, and then you sort of go back to it, and then you get increasingly sort of sceptical. But you still trust your family by and large. We have lots of other figures here, but in actual fact, they're interesting, but we now need to link these into the basic question, which is the technology one, and we haven't done that yet, to be honest. Data trust. Now, this is what Darren's going to mainly be talking about, and I suppose it's the thrust of what we're talking about today. The survey carried out by the Public Opinion Research Institute is very, very interesting, really. It sort of demonstrates a specific relationship to technology from Hong Kongers. Okay. And it sort of fits in a way this idea that there has to be a basic sensitivity and acceptability of technology in order for these things to work, and that certainly appears to be confirmed in the case of our answers with Hong Kong. Actually, we've got three positions here. The first is the general questions about 5G, about using mobile apps, about is technology a force for progress. These have a large degree of a sentiment, of agreement. So our sample, no problem with 5G, no problem actually with mobile apps, unless they're linked to the government, of course, which we'll come back to. And actually the general belief is that technology is a force for progress. So there's not a sort of massive contestation of the role of technology. And this fits quite well with some of the work that Calvin's been doing, showing that if we take the various indexes of smart city, then we see that Hong Kong actually still appears to be one of the most connected places in the world. And there's a natural affiliation in a way with technology. But then we get to the divided bit, and I won't say too much here because Darren's going to talk about it. But it's clear that opinion is very divided in our survey on some specific platforms. It's very divided about the Leave Home Safe app, and there was a question on that. It's divided also in relation to the electronic ID card, the single digital identity, and smart lampposts. There's quite clear divisions on those three questions. And then there's a virtual consensus in terms of being opposed to the idea that the government should transgress what is perceived to be norms of confidentiality in data. So you've got basically three positions. You've got a belief in technology, you've got skepticism about governmental apps for technology, and then you've got really quite a strong opposition about the idea that the government should have too much control over data. So you've got a real attempt to preserve data integrity from too much government, basically, in the case of Hong Kong. Okay, we did quite a lot on smart lampposts, so I won't say much because Darren's going to talk about this, but it is actually a fascinating thing, the smart lamppost. We also did some interviews on that with Emily, and there was some really interesting things came out of the interviews. But by and large, if we take the smart lampposts, in the slide I'll now show you, we see that the only people who really supported strongly the smart lampposts were the pro-establishment camp, and that the pro-democracy and localist camp strongly opposed it. I will show you some slides here now. But there's also an age thing going on. The higher the age, the more supportive residents were of smart lampposts. The higher educated young people were, the less supportive they were towards smart lampposts. Those are the figures, and essentially, so the lowest age cohort, 18 to 24, we see that almost 60% oppose smart lampposts. When we get to the older cohort, 65 to 69, then most people support smart lampposts. There's a very clear age division here. We can see it. It strikes out. By and large, as a whole, actually about 50% supported smart lampposts, 30% opposed them, and the others were more neutral. But there's a very, very clear age distinction there. And if we move on, interestingly enough, this is a quote from one of our interviews, because we believe in mixed methods, hopefully. And this was just, we won't say who this was from, but this was a very good interview we had. I was involved in the Smart Lamppost Technical Ad Hoc Committee. The Smart Lamppost has a lot of things. They call it a smart furniture of the city. With the Smart Lamppost, we can take care of a lot of information that we have never had a chance to collect before. But people just don't trust the system. They just don't trust that you are so transparent or open to them. We have everything ready, but the trust is the one important element that's missing. I did not anticipate that. Trust is so important at this moment. And I think it's interesting to try and mix, obviously, the data, the raw data, with the interview evidence. Age and political identification, just to say a quick word on this. Very interesting. As I said before, just about that, most people do not agree that the government should collect data, even if it's to improve its services. That's what comes out of our survey. The only people who do, actually, are the people who define themselves as pro-establishment. So if we look at this table, and the question, I welcome it if the government collects my personal data to improve its service. We see that those identifying themselves as localists or pro-democracy camp, very strong opposition to that. Politically neutral and more neutral. Those describing themselves as pro-establishment are very, very strongly in favour of that proposition. So there's a very, very clear political distinction here. Trust in the intermediaries of the smart city. I'm not going to say too much about this because Darren's going to talk about this. But clearly there's a series of questions where we talk about who do you actually trust in terms of trustworthiness. And trustworthiness being in a sense, a dimension of trust, but one that brings in actors. So clearly, trustworthiness, it involves notions of benevolence, integrity, honesty, but of actors. So, I mean, do you believe the government to be benevolent, integral, and honest, for example, will have an impact, perhaps, on how you perceive of public services. So we have a whole bunch of questions about public, private, and hybrid providers of smart city services. It took about 6 months to agree these questions, actually. And there was still, and at the end, we carried them out anyway, but there was probably one or two questions that worked better than others. But yeah, we have to be honest here, not all the survey worked as well as it might have done, but some of it worked extremely well. Trust in providers, just very briefly, the following sequential order is established for the survey, and I'll let Darren talk about it, but clearly, community organisations and NGOs are the most trusted. The Legislative Council was the least trusted of all organisations in our map. And there's some interesting findings that I'll just let Darren talk about because I won't really, I don't want to say everything. But again, there's a clear political division here. There's some figures there on do you trust Chinese-funded companies to deliver smart city-related services? And there we see that again, the figures are quite eloquent in a way. And then we talk about the government. And again, I will defer actually to Darren here because in a sense, I've already talked for 20 minutes. Again, some figures on trust and mistrust in government. In the interviews, clearly, we talked to a former government minister who had a nice quote actually in terms of the smart city. One informed insider diagnosed the situation as being quite challenging in a sort of underplay on account of the various audiences that the government had to address. It was essential to communicate with your own people, your local audience, Secondly, Hong Kong has a mainland audience consisting of mainly various types of governmental authorities in China. Thirdly, Hong Kong has to communicate with the international business community. And these distinct audiences don't always coincide, of course. So in the case of the smart city, this has produced confusion in the view of this interlocutor, because the Hong Kong government has not spent time really reflecting on what they're producing. And the stuff that they keep producing doesn't seem to satisfy anyone. And so that was, I think, quite a nice quote to sort of add to the survey. In this short paper, 4 lenses, characteristics of trust, trust attitudes towards technology, intermediaries and institutions. I think we can say actually what comes out of this is the characteristic trust we haven't really worked through yet, and we will do. There's a lot more to be said about that. The data trust, I think, reveals a paradox whereby Hong Kong residents are simultaneously highly connected and adept at technology, but mistrusting towards governmental applications and control over data freedom. Second point is that the view towards intermediaries reaffirms a distinction between governmental and non-governmental providers. But above all, there's a problem of political trust, and maybe the debate is a bit of an unspoken one about trust in the smart city. And so you ask questions about trust in the smart city, but the answers we're getting are not necessarily answers about trust in the smart city, or they are, but they're answers that go beyond that. And there's some sensitive questions there about government apps, particularly the Leave Home Safe one's very interesting, types of infrastructure, programs, and it appears to some extent that the idea, I mean, there's something else going on, but we're not going to talk about that something else going on, because we're talking about this particular survey for the moment. But there's clearly from the survey something else going on. Now, having said all of that, I'm now going to just ask, is there 1 or 2 pressing questions, and then we'll move over to our to the next paper givers. We decided we'd go through the format of 1 or 2 pressing questions, but most questions for discussion at the end, if that's okay. So if there's a pressing question, we can take it. If not, we can carry on. I think it's probably best in that case if we carry on. And we have the questions at the end. Is that okay for people? And then we really will have a good session for questions at the end. So thanks everybody for listening. Now I need some technical people to come and change the slides and everything. But I'm sure that you can do this. So I'm going to come out of this screen, I guess. I've come into another screen, share the screen, and this is going to be Darren.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just see if I can switch on. Doesn't matter. Okay. Just 1 second. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very happy to be here today. So to be able to present to you some of the findings. So my name is Darren. So I'm from the Department of Geography and Asian Energy Studies Center. So our office is on the 12th floor. So very happy. So very convenient for me to come down here. So that gives me some more time for me to prepare the presentation. So that's great. So let's get started. So I think Professor Cole has already discussed a lot about the trust perspective, about so why do we do such a research in the trust perspective in smart city. So I just put some very brief notes in my presentation. So basically, so why do we do, what's the importance of trust and technology in smart city? So basically, if we talk about smart city development, so basically, so this is the Internet of Things that is driving the smart city. The development of smart city, it is the fundamental building block. So this is one thing that as the cutting point for our research. But when we talk about this technology, so since it will goes into different aspects of your daily life. So it basically we think that it touches upon different level of analysis, which Professor Cole has already talked about as well. So it touches upon interpersonal, social, and collective different level of analysis. So if we talk about the level of trust and smart city, so then so interpersonal trust, which means that, so do you trust the people that you know? So for example, if we use pay me, so this is a kind of like smart economy, so devices or services. So then I'm going to pay someone for the lunch, for example. So do you trust this kind of technology that I can transfer the money? So through these devices and then to the others. So this is a one form of trust that is about interpersonal. The next thing is about social trust. So the next level is so you have some people that is like have a common social background with you, but you may not actually know him or her in person. So then do you have a trust in the technology so that you can communicate with him or her? So this is like widely used in our daily life, email or any kind of like just like pay me, that the example that I bring forth. So or we term it as thin trust. So that is centered on a more general information on a shared common ground for within it. So our context is like in Hong Kong, so in the society as in general. And the third thing is about the political trust or the trust in government. So this is even a very thin form of trust. Some people say, some scholars describe that. So it is characterized by a kind of general expectation that the political leaders will act according to some form of rules. So that's related to the integrity, the openness, the transparency of the government, and also the benevolence. So and so on and so forth. So if we talk about the trust in technology, so there are basically, so different scholars have different way to try to categorize so the different kinds of trust. So in relation to technology, so Langton this scholar, so they have like two kinds of trust in technology they divide. One is like human-like trust constructs. So this is related to benevolence and integrity and the ability. The other thing is about the system-like trust construct. So which is related to helpfulness, reliability, and also about the functional, or more about the IT perspective, or you may say IoT perspective. So about do they trust the system? Do they trust this kind of technology? And but that also related to the human-like trust construct, which means that do you use that kind of technology in a proper way? The other thing is about the categorization is from Professor Wilson Wong. So he divided the tech trust and technology into trust enhancing technology and trust enabling technology. Professor Cole has already talked about that, so I'm not going to like go into details for this kind of categorization. So the basic question. So so then in order to know what we are going to about do people trust about each other? Do people like about the smart city services? So we have this kind of basic questions. So first of all, we want to know the level of trust and satisfaction in smart technologies in Hong Kong. So do they trust different smart city technologies providers? So is there any different differences between the social groups? So in the level of trust, and what are the factors account for such differences? So these are the basic questions driving this presentation. So as you have already seen some of the results. So but I'm going to go through it again. So so the methodology is basically a telephone survey. So conducted in March and April in 2021. So the sample size, sorry, there's a typo. This is 804 should be. So and the effective response rate is about slightly lower than 50%. This is the basic statistics for the samples. So we have like it basically it resembled the Hong Kong statistics in 2020. So we have like slightly more ratio of the female, and the age group is like basically is quite evenly distributed. And we also have about in terms of place of birth. So we have like about 60% of the people of the respondents is they're born in Hong Kong, but while we also have like some 36% of people respondents so they were born in the mainland China. So let's move on to the findings. The first finding is like, when you ask them, if citizens don't trust the government cannot implement policy effectively. So this is a statement that we ask them. So whether you agree or not. So basically, the green one are basically so it is on a scale of 0 to 10, I should say. So the green one is basically they have agreement. So which means that they answer which is about 5, and then the red one are the disagreements. So they have answer from 0 to 4, and yellow is half and half. So which is like they score exactly 5. So as you could see that now we don't have a very quite even distribution among all the age groups. So on this statement, so they think that trust is important, so for a effective policy implementation. And we ask, do you think that the different elements of smart city are important? So basically, smart city based on the Hong Kong Smart City Blueprint. So there are 6 criteria of a smart city. So the first one is smart mobility, and then smart living. Again, you could see that. So across the different age groups, you still have a very high level of agreement. So that is the same for smart environment and smart people. And that is about the same for smart government and also for smart economy. Maybe for smart economy, you have a lower level of agreement among the elderly age groups. So maybe one of the possible reason is because so they cannot like use the smart economy and this kind of services too much. So and then so when we ask about whether you support it or you oppose the development into Hong Kong into a smart city, you could see that in general people do support. So with an exception is like the 75 to 79 age group. So they have a lot of support. So we don't understand. So because so maybe this is like a bit biased, but in general, so this is they support that. But however, if we ask whether you understand the contents of smart city, and then as you could see, so most people don't know. And some of the age groups, for example, the 75 to 79 age groups, so they have about 20-something% of agreement. So the thing is that you think this is important, and then we ask them, they support the smart city development. However, you are supporting something that you don't even understand. So this is like one thing that is like, you may say surprising, or you say interesting. But so in the previous version of this PowerPoint, I would say that Hong Kong citizens like would have like some form of interest. So in the society, we don't know. So what do they trust? But this is like one thing that is in my mind. So do they have something about interest? Or so I just put here. So I change it later on. I think that they have a general trust in the technologies. So this is like my question that I would like to further analyze. So this is finding 1, and then going into finding 2. So we asked something about whether do you feel satisfied or dissatisfied about the development of different kind of like smart city services. So the first is, so here is the first one, is about the smart ID. So and you see that you don't they in general they don't really like, or they don't really feel satisfied about these smart IDs, well, except with the exception of the 45, the middle age group, the 45 to 49. So they have like more, still lower than average. But as you could see that. But how about the other kind? So if we ask more general, the smart city online services or the online services provided by the government department, and then you could see that there are a little bit more satisfaction. And if we ask further, so how about smart lampposts? Do you support that? Well, you can see that. Well, there were quite a lot of support compared to the online services and the smart IDs. So of course, the way we are asked the question is a little bit different, so that we may have to be very careful. But in general, as you could see that, so this is also a proxy whether you feel satisfactory for the smart lampposts. And then we ask further. So, do you think the Live Home Safe app or other devices, other services, do they think it is important or unimportant to use that kind of innovative technology to cope with the epidemic or the COVID-19? And you see that, so quite a lot of people, so they are supporting that, although not overwhelmingly a lot. So, but you could see that one thing is about when we talk about smart lampposts and this kind of Live Home Safe app, for example, you have the least agreement with the younger generations. So basically, so they were generally against all kind of smart city services. So I did not put 5G here, but you could see that. So 5G they support a lot. So if I put a graph here, then so I could tell you that. So for 5G they support a lot, but for other kinds of smart city services they don't support that. So the other observation is that the smart city services that are more related to private information, so basically, so people don't feel very satisfied. So it is one way that maybe people don't really feel trust, they don't have a trust in the government. Do they in that they may not trust them in their honor. They don't do maybe they manipulate, I should say. They're not very happy about the government in using their data. So for fear that maybe they would manipulate the data, or they would use it for other purposes other than just for providing smart city services. And so basically, so this is the main observation. So the Hong Kong citizens basically are generally not very satisfied by the technology application by the government. So then the next finding, so then we want to know, so do you trust these agencies or distrust smart city providers in providing the services? So then the first thing is about the government. So do you trust or distrust the government to provide smart city services? Again, so you don't see a lot of agreement. So you don't see a very high level of trust, especially for the younger generation. You have a lot of mistrust. But in the heading, I put higher level of trust to the Hong Kong government in providing smart city services, which means that it is already the highest level if you compare them to the Legislative Council. So you have a lower level of trust to the Legislative Council in providing smart city services. So it is across all the age groups, all the different generations, and even lower level of trust to the District Council. Professor Cole has also mentioned about that. So why is that? So this is we have to do further analysis. So, but basically, so there are less trust or the least trust for the district council among the middle-aged generations, but compared to the government and the legislative council, but more trust among the younger and the elder generations. So this is one quite surprising or quite a little bit unexpected observation among these findings. So if we move on, so we don't talk about the public institution, we talk about the private sectors. Then, so is there any differences? As you can see, the first of all, we try to look at the local, so basically the Hong Kong companies. As you can see that it is quite evenly distributed across all the age groups, but still, well, you don't have a very high level of trust. So it is about the highest is about nearly 50%. So if it is foreign companies, so it is a little bit out of my expectation. So it is about the same, sorry, about the same level of trust between the Hong Kong company and the foreign company. If you talk about the Chinese companies, so of course, like expectedly, so for the younger generations, we don't have a high level of trust. But however, for the middle age group and the elderly, so you could see that so they have higher level of trust to the Chinese companies. If you talk about the community organizations, so again, the younger generation, so they trust a lot. But for the middle age and the elderly age group, so it is quite evenly distributed. So basically, so in the Hong Kong society, as you could expect, the younger generation usually they have a different level, different opinions compared to the middle age group and the higher and the elder age group in terms of the level of trust to different parties in terms of the satisfaction to smart city services. So basically, so this is like the last slide, a little bit conclusion that I want to make. So basically, we will say that Hong Kong citizens have a genuine, a genuine trust in the technologies. So as we could see from their support in Hong Kong to be developed into a smart city. So so basically, in general, so they trust the technology, though, so they like Hong Kong to be a smart city. However, as I said, so the younger generation is different from the middle age and the elder generations, and what they don't like is the application of technology. So how they use the technology, how they apply the technology is basically not satisfactory, and they also don't trust the parties in doing that. So this is basically, or we think that, so there is a general mistrust in the government in the use of data. So it is a low level of so-called the trust in the trust enhancing technology to try to use the theory or the categorization from the beginning. So this is like so far my preliminary conclusion that I could make. So I would be very happy if you could sort of give some more opinions and comments. Now this is the end. Now thank you very much.
Thank you, Darren. Okay, I'll carry on sharing at a distance. If we have a pressing question, we can take it now. If not, we'll carry on straight away for Calvin, and then we'll have some very pressing questions after that, I'm sure of it. Okay. So, Calvin.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
How can I share that? Is this already sharing? No.
Where's Ivan? Ivan, can you?
Should I just pick this one? Okay. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Calvin, the Senior Research Assistant of Professor Ko for the project Trust and the Smart City. My section of the survey is about the smart city image of Hong Kong in the international context. So, this analysis focuses on two questions, which are the question 11 and 12. Question 11 is about international comparison. Interviewees required to choose a city out of the 6 Asian cities, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taipei, Tokyo, Seoul, and Shenzhen, which they believe is doing the best in the smart city development. Question 12 is about local pride. Interviewees express on what scale they agree with the following statement. I will be proud if Hong Kong is recognized as one of the top smart cities in the world. In the first step, these two questions are analyzed with the 5 demographic data: age, education attainment, occupation, region of birth, and political inclination. Before showing the association, here's the result of question 11 compared with the information from another reliable source. The left-hand side is the ranks generated from the question 11 of this survey, and the right-hand side is the ranks from City Emotion Index, published by the IESE Business School in 2020. This index is selected because it has the highest score and therefore the best performance out of the other available smart city index based on my other research. However, I'm not going to go in depth here. So in this table, both ranks saw a quite huge difference, especially Hong Kong and Shenzhen. Hong Kong, in fact, was having a quite good assessment by the smart city index, but our interviewees didn't think so. While Shenzhen had quite a low rank in the index, our interviewees had a quite good impression on this city. In addition, Singapore and Tokyo are having the consistent result, meaning they are generally recognized. Firstly, I will show the association of question 11 with age. The red color indicates Hong Kong, and you can see it is quite obvious that the older the interviewees, they tend to choose Hong Kong, while the younger interviewees, they tend to choose Taipei Tokyo and Seoul as the best developed smart city. Shenzhen was also the popular option, but relatively in the middle age group. Next is with the education attainment. A tendency of choosing Hong Kong can also be observed, that the lower the education attainment, the more interviewee would choose Hong Kong as the best developed smart city, which is a negative association. On the other hand, the higher the education attainment, the more interviewees they will choose Tokyo also as the best developed smart city. So it is a positive association. Shenzhen was slightly more popular in the lower secondary group. For occupation, most interviewees who chose Hong Kong were retired, while Tokyo was mostly chosen by students and clerical workers. So was by the unemployed interviewees, and Shenzhen, although it is always the popular option, but it still has the lowest percentage in the student group. In this light, it is obvious that most of the interviewees who chose Hong Kong were mostly from mainland China. Local Hong Kong interviewees, in fact, tend to choose the other cities, especially Taipei, Tokyo, and Seoul. They were mostly chosen by the local Hong Kong interviewees. The last one is the political inclination. It also shows some significant tendency. More than half of the interviewees from the pro-establishment camp, they chose Shenzhen, while less than 10% of the interviewees from the localist group choose Shenzhen. Most of them tend to choose Tokyo instead. No interviewees from the pro-establishment camp chose Taipei. And although Hong Kong was most evenly chosen by all the groups, so which means Hong Kong actually is not that influenced by the political inclination. And therefore, I have also visualized the result of this analysis. The interviewees who were pro-China tend to choose Shenzhen, while the interviewees from pro-democracy camp, they tend to choose Tokyo and then Seoul and Taipei. Singapore and Hong Kong, they were in the middle because they were not influenced. And here is the table showing the summary of the previous survey analysis. And it leads to the conclusion of some attributes influencing the selection of the Hong Kong citizens. If they are older, retired, have low education attainment, and if they are from mainland China, then they would tend to choose Hong Kong as the best developed smart city. In the opposite, if they are younger, if they are, have higher education attainment, student or unemployed from Hong Kong, or from the pro-democracy camp or the localist group, then they would tend to choose Tokyo also. Before going into question 12, question 11 and 12, they were analyzed together to see if there was any association. In fact, it could be observed that if the interviewees chose Hong Kong or Shenzhen, they would agree more with the statement that they would be proud of Hong Kong. But if the interviewees, they chose Tokyo, Taipei, or Seoul, in average, they tend to disagree with the statement, which means they would not be proud of Hong Kong. Here is also another visualization of the association. Interviewees choosing Singapore or don't know were in the middle, meaning the association of these two options were not as significant as with the other options. So now I will talk about the association of question 12 with the demographic data. There is slightly positive association between question 12 and age, meaning that the older the interviewees, the more agreement they would have, like they would be prouder of Hong Kong, when Hong Kong is the top smart cities. But you can also see that for the age group 25 to 29, they are the only group tend not to be proud of Hong Kong. For education attainment, a slightly negative association can also be observed. The lower the education attainment, the more agreement the interviewees would have with the statement. For occupation, actually there is no obvious attitude could be found, except the homemaker groups tend to agree the most with the statement. In this graph, it shows the interviewees from mainland China or Southeast Asia had the most agreement with this statement, while indeed local Hong Kong interviewees, they had the least agreement with the statement for being part of Hong Kong. And the last one is about the political inclination. It is also obvious that the interviewees from the establishment camp had the most agreement, while the interviewees from the localist group had the most disagreement. Interviewees from the pro-democracy camp tend to be neutral for the statement. And here is also another illustration of the tendency. Pro-establishment camp and localist group are the two extremes, which can also be shown in this question, because their attitude to this question is also quite extreme. And here is the table concluding the result of the previous analysis. And it can also lead to the conclusion that the attribute influencing the Hong Kong citizens, the attitudes. And you can also see that the group of citizens who are proud of Hong Kong developing into the top smart city is the same as the group which choose Hong Kong as the best smart city. They are old, have low education attainment, retired from mainland China or Southeast Asia, and this time they are also mostly from pro-establishment camp. And therefore, we can further conclude that this group of citizens are those who are always being positive towards Hong Kong's smart city development and image, and also always being proud of Hong Kong as the worldwide top smart cities. And here shows the 5 common attributes. So after presenting the associations with the demographic data, 2 more questions from the survey are also picked to analyze with the question 11 and 12, which are question 5 and 7. Question 5 is about supportiveness. The interviewees express on what scale they support or oppose developing Hong Kong into a smart city. Question 7 is about public trust. The interviewees express on what scale they trust or distrust the government, the legislative council, and the district council in providing smart city-related service. Firstly, the association of question 11 and 5 shows that interviewees who chose Hong Kong or Shenzhen were much more supportive of Hong Kong. However, interviewees choosing Taipei even tend to oppose the smart city development of Hong Kong. For interviewees who chose Tokyo also, they were also less supportive. Here is the illustration of the supportiveness. Although the interviewees choosing Tokyo also were not as negative as that of Taipei, the tendency fit with the previous conclusion and the identified group of Hong Kong citizens. The group who chose Hong Kong as the best developed smart city were also really supportive of Hong Kong, which is reasonable and logical. And the group who chose Tokyo also were not so supportive of Hong Kong. Even in question 12 with question 5, there is a strong and significantly positive correlation, meaning that the more supportive of the interviewees, the prouder of Hong Kong they would be. Therefore, question 5, 11, and 12 are interrelated, meaning that Hong Kong citizens who tend to choose Hong Kong as the best smart city will also be more supportive of Hong Kong developing into a smart city. And therefore, they would be also proud of Hong Kong being recognized as one of the top smart cities. For question 7, the analysis with question 11 shows the positive association between choosing Hong Kong and the trust of those 3 institutions, meaning that the higher the trust in the government, legislative council, or district council, the more possible that the interviewees choose Hong Kong. Furthermore, although there was also positive association between choosing Shenzhen and the trust of Hong Kong government and legislative council, these 2 institutions also had negative association with choosing Taipei, Tokyo, or Seoul, meaning that if the interviewees they don't trust Hong Kong government or legislative council, they would actually tend to choose Taipei, Tokyo, or Seoul. The association between question 12 and question 7 is quite obvious. The higher the trust in those 3 institutions, the prouder of Hong Kong the interviewee would be. Although the association with the trust in the district council is not as strong as with the other 2 institutions. Finally, I would also like to present the association between question 12 and technologies. In this survey, we have asked the interviewee their opinions on lift home safe and smart lampposts. It turns out a strong positive correlation could also be observed, which can lead to the conclusion that the prouder of Hong Kong the interviewees, the more supportive they were of the 2 smart city technologies. And therefore, to interpret the findings, a chart of the relationship is produced. Local pride could be influenced by public trust, supportiveness, and international comparison, while supportiveness would also be influenced by international comparison. Since public trust can affect international comparison, a positive scenario could be imagined. To boost the local pride of Hong Kong citizens, it is essential to enhance the public trust in the government, legislative council, or district council. Therefore, more citizens will perceive Hong Kong as the best developed smart cities, and thus they will be more supportive of Hong Kong. And eventually, they will tend to be proud of Hong Kong being a worldwide top smart city. It can help conclude that gaining the public trust is the prioritized task and the essential factor when the Hong Kong government is pushing the smart city development, as it is correlated with the supportiveness, local pride, and international image perception. It also hugely influenced the launching and acceptance of urban technologies, such as the installation of smart lampposts and the usage of the pandemic tracking apps. Currently, there is obvious a group of Hong Kong citizens which has high trust and therefore are relatively supportive of Hong Kong. As a result, the government should consider to shift their resources to the other less supportive groups, such as those highly educated, students, or from the pro-democracy camp. Therefore, it could help reduce the friction while implementing policies. In addition, the government could also consider to monitor the progress of enhancing the local supportiveness by assessing the local citizens' attitude to the Hong Kong's image, such as an annual survey to see how the citizens' view of Hong Kong change in the international comparison. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think probably the best thing is if we now open up for general discussion and debate after those two very rich presentations and my introductory one. There's a lot to be said. We might take a question or a comment. Dion, you're going to check for the online comment. Yeah, we've got some online, but we'll start off maybe with a first round table in the room itself, because this is always the. Okay, I better put my mask on because I'm being watched out. Okay. So, let's have a first round of questions. Can I see a question from Kenneth? Oh no, I didn't see Kenneth.
Yeah. Can I start?
Yeah, please.
I will start with something general, but with perhaps certain policy implications for the panel to respond to as well. Obviously, most governments would like to show tax as something neutral. Is for the advancement of well-being, is for efficiency enhancement, is for doing good jobs for the people at large, right? And such as the vaccines that we have been talking about on and off for such an extended period of time in Hong Kong, among other technological developments or gadgets. Interestingly, though, in the context of Hong Kong, it doesn't seem to be possible, judging from the findings of the survey or the angles that the panel members today have tried to illustrate. Users, meaning Hong Kong people, first and foremost, really have seen or tried to understand these attacks from with political lenses on, and of course, together with that, the lenses, the demographical features such as age, educational attainment, and so on. It's very much concurring with what social movement specialists or general Hong Kong politics people would like to tell us about, because there's a pervasive crisis in Hong Kong, so anything coming from the government would definitely be tainted or treated with skepticism by the recipients. So here we come at a sort of a crossroads, if you like. If a government has the tax and the feasibilities to do good things for the people. But without the political asset, or without the persuasiveness, right? It may be undermined by lack of trust or maybe other reasons. How successful would that be for a government to claim to bring about a smart city plan or strategy for Hong Kong? So that's very much a public policy issue among experts that we've come to know over and over again. And then by extension, if I may, by extension, would it be better in terms of solutions, looking at the findings today, to ask the government and the government people to move away and maybe put themselves behind a certain veil and let experts, non-political spokespersons to handle the smart city project and all the related smart lampposts and other technological gadgets and plans, so that people might see them more as something useful, helpful, improve well-being, rather than anything like another sort of conspiracy initiated by the government, or very much backed by the power that be, to closely monitor Hong Kong people, to really try to extract personal data aggressively for the sake of managing, controlling people's daily lives, just like those stories that we have witnessed in different parts of mainland China, for example, Xinjiang, or Tibet for that matter. So that's a very general point of departure, perhaps, of Mr. Ko. I hope it's okay to start with, just to kickstart the whole discussion for more people to come in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, maybe we can take another question. I've marked down the main points. Emily.
Yes, thank you very much. It was really 3 very interesting presentations, and it's so nice to see the survey being presented, because I recall that you've been working very hard on these survey questions, and of course analysis afterwards, and I'm so happy to see all these nice figures. And I have 2 questions for Darren and for Kathleen. For Darren, I was intrigued by the lack of trust in district councillors, which I used to believe that it was a layer of bigger trust. So how do you explain this discrepancy between the general knowledge about what we would say about district councillors and what is revealed in the survey? And does it have something to do with the time when the survey was implemented? So that's my question for you, Darren. And for you, Calvin, I had always thought that somehow the nature of the political regime had something to do with the level of trust. And I love to see your graph when you have the green side and the more bluish side, and in between we have Hong Kong and Singapore. So if we want to define Singapore as a authoritarian or mild authoritarian regime, Singapore is doing not that bad actually in terms of trust and citizens' trust when it is about the smart city. So do you agree with this interpretation, or do you think that Singapore is a standalone type of system wherein the political nature of the regime has nothing, is not linked with the level of trust of the citizens when it comes to smart city?
Thanks, Emily. I think we'll stop there for the moment. So we'll answer these 2 questions, and then we'll undoubtedly have another round of questions, okay? And then we'll go to the people on Zoom. I mean, maybe I can take the first question, Kenneth, and then I'll hand over to you guys. I think it's an excellent question, as one would expect. What's interesting here, I think, is, in a sense, I think what we see, I can't read my writing, that's typical age. But no, I mean, it doesn't matter. I more or less remember what I want to say. I think what's typical here is, in a sense, we, what struck me when preparing this paper, and particularly the paper I'm writing about narratives at the same time, is how, in a sense, in a political regime that's not really a polity, if you like. Technology assumes an enormous importance from the history of the from the history of the handover, really. Technology has, in a sense, become the project. Hong Kong's done very well in terms of all sorts of indexes. In terms of e-governance indexes, in terms of websites and so on. So it's done well on that aspect. So technology has become a sort of airside for if you like, a different sort of political message. And so much has been invested in technology as a political message, or as a political discourse, that it actually becomes quite difficult for the government to sort of withdraw from that. However, and let's come back to your point, were it to be a smart government, playing on words a little bit here, it might well withdraw from that, because what we learn elsewhere is that, if you want to neutralise these difficult questions, then you set up independent regulatory agencies, you set up your expert groups, you basically hide behind this veil, not so much veil of ignorance as veil of justification, if you like, I don't want to use the word technocracy, but in a sense, there's a function for that. There's clearly a function to say, to allow, in a sense, technical experts to deal with these issues. But I think in the case of Hong Kong, and it is striking, I think there's been so much investment really in this as a sort of political project in a way, but it's quite difficult to withdraw from that. So that's the first point. Second, and of course, if we take the Smart City Blueprint, which we've looked at quite a bit. This is, what struck me with the figures that Darren showed was really you've got a big paradox here. You've got support for the 6 main policies of the Smart City Blueprint, and yet total lack of support or understanding of what the Smart City Blueprint is. So that means the Smart City Blueprint as a document, just as a policy document, is not really understood. People don't understand what is the Smart City Blueprint, although they might well understand the advantages of smart mobility or even smart government, whatever. So, and that's interesting, because in a discursive sense, it's extremely complicated. If you can't persuade people on the basis of that your policy vision, in a sense, actually represents the substance of the policy, it's problematical. So that's the point about that. Just on another point. Clearly, one point we didn't make today, but these are circular ideas. These are ideas. I mean, the smart city is a circular idea. It circulates very, very many different countries across the world. I mean, the smart city blueprint itself is based really. It's not endogenous to Hong Kong, really. It's part of that broad international movement of trying to endogenize technology, but it's not particularly original policy for Hong Kong. So that's why I think we also have this hiatus a bit between the substance of the policy document and the difficulty actually in having a tech discourse, if you want to use that word. And hence the temptation is to, as one of the books, the Green Book, is to look at the world through tech goggles. But tech goggles don't always allow you really to understand the dynamics that are going on, which is why I said in my talk that obviously there's something else going on. So I mean I don't want to say any more because I've already said enough, and maybe I'll hand over to my colleagues.
So about so before I get to Emily's question, I think one thing. I think is about the solution about the smart city. So to can we break through and any breakthrough that we can make. So now, since I did not show all the results, one thing that is already asked about the PPP, the public-private partnership. So I could talk a little bit about the result because I don't have it here. So I think basically people have about the same level of the PPP as compared to the local companies and the foreign companies. So now if we don't do this question, then I think PPP may be one solution. So and then to invite the public. So if the government really intend to invite the public to participate in the smart city development, and with the private sector as well. So maybe this is one solution, but since we have done this question, we have asked this question to the public, and it is not exactly about the same level. So basically, it is like, I think we know the political atmosphere. So it is basically so they don't trust the government in doing anything. So you could say basically, especially for the younger generations. So there are many ways that people, the government can regain trust from the public. Do they do it? I am not sure. So as Hong Kong people, then maybe Kelvin can say a bit more worse. So because I'm not too young, so maybe I don't represent the younger generations. So this is one thing. So I just throw the ball to Kelvin. So yeah. So about the Emily's question. So I think there are multiple possible reasons for that. So why there don't have a very high level of trust to the district council. So the first thing is the way we ask the question. So because we have so let me go back. So the way we ask is like, how much do you trust or distrust the district council in providing smart city services? So we know that the district councillors they may not have an expertise in smart city services, and in fact most people don't. We had another pilot study about smart energy in Saikong. We happen to be able to now the former district councillor. So we understand. So from the news that a lot of either they resigned or they got DQ. So we happen to be able to interview one of the district councillor in Saikong, basically two former district councillor in Saikong, and then we asked them, do you know about smart city? So anything about smart city development, anything about the smart city blueprint in Hong Kong, and they don't know. Yeah, so they are district councillors already. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, this is the point. So that's why if you ask people like, oh, do you trust them in providing? So they don't know. So they don't have the expertise though. So they don't know. So this is one possible question. Another thing is about when we talk about the district council result. Maybe kind of you know. So I would say that possibly it is an attitude to say that, oh, I don't like the government. So it is not about, so I trust that people's ability or that he is going to do a good job as a district councillor. So maybe this is one interpretation. So when you ask them, so do you think they are good in providing the smart city services? May not be. So this is one thing. And the third possible reason, I'm not sure, but I don't have data, but now people are moving out. Now people who are pro-democrats are migrating. So we do the questionnaire in March and April. So people are considering migrating. So I didn't check the statistics at that point, but this is another thing that I could think of. So because when we ask, we don't have a lot of arrest of the district councillor in March and April, I think. So the time, I think, may not be very sensitive. So when we do the questionnaire, but the national security law is in place, so we know that. So this is some of the possible reasons that I could think of now. Thank you.
Yeah, so back to Dr. Chuang's question, I actually would say it is difficult to see if there's any behind factor influencing the people choose Singapore. Because during my analysis, firstly, I couldn't observe any tendency from that fast demographic data of the citizens to choose Singapore. And it's also possible because these interviewees, they are mostly from Hong Kong, they are not a Singapore citizen. So the opinion from them is actually how they know or heard about Singapore, this city. But based on my previous research on the Smart City Index internationally, it is quite interesting that most of the Smart City Index, they are actually published by the institution from Singapore. And also, Singapore is always the first one in all the ranking. So I would say, I'm not saying that technology is not good enough to be a smart city, but the advertisement is quite good. So maybe that's also the reason how the Hong Kong citizen can know about the Singapore's development is by they are recognized, or when they just randomly type smart city, or Singapore is the first. It's always also shown on the news that Singapore is doing the best in even in the pandemic, tracking or controlling. So what I guess is why there is no specific tendency of the citizens or the interviewees choose Singapore is because generally more often they just think Singapore is always the best in smart city development.
Thanks very much. I come back to some more things, but we've got some more questions here. So Jean-Pierre.
Yes, well, thank you for the survey, in your presentation. There is one thing which is complicating your study, is question of timing and question of trends. I have a question first. When was the Hong Kong Smart City Blueprint issued?
December 2020.
Oh dear. Yeah. The whole thing is, I mean, is correct. From the beginning.
Well, it was December 2017, but it was
Okay,
renewed in
so
2017.
yeah, last year.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference with Singapore, by the way. I mean, you've got new. I mean, if you are in a new Hong Kong, Singapore has been authoritarian from day one. So inception in 1965, and people have been happy with it. People who didn't like it left, and people who stayed in Singapore since '65 have been used to that kind of gentle, enlightened, if I may say, heavy-handed government. And so that's why they see themselves as a model, and they're very proud of being Singaporean, and being smart and everything. And, but Hong Kong, and that's the problem with your survey. You're doing your survey at a particular time, which in Hong Kong is very new, unprecedented in many ways, and the whole, and the whole questionnaire and the answers are corrupt by two major factors. You mentioned one, which is the NSL, and the fact that Hong Kong political system has been moving from a hybrid system to a real authoritarian system and everything. So, and that complicates, of course, the people's reaction. And the other thing is the pandemic, which is, I mean, closely intertwined with the NSL and the implementation. So, my question is, I don't know if I have an answer, but clearly, I mean, your advice to the government is just to put things on hold and maybe wait for better times. I don't know whether there will be better times in Hong Kong for convincing the Hong Kong people that at least the part of the society which is pro-democracy that it's good to move ahead and to apply the to use the leave home, the identification leave home. I was in Yunlong yesterday, and I could see no young people would they all fill a form and they put James Bond, Carrie as a name. So they don't care. So clearly they boycott the whole system.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it's tricky. I don't know how you can. How you can to free yourself from those two major variables, which is the pandemic and the new and the political environment.
Well, I don't
have the answer, but I'm sure you have that in mind.
I can give a stab at an answer.
I'm Nixon. So a graduate of 2011 of GIS. Then I earned a master's degree at Fudan University. So it's been a long time since I've been here again. So thank you, Professor Cole, Darren, and Kevin. So I think you guys done this research in a very challenging time. And I'm particularly interested in the part of presentation by Darren. That I can see that because the general topic and title of this project is trust and smart city, right? So I see that you trust, basically you measure the trust to the people or organization. That I see that you divided into three levels, in the interpersonal, social, and trust in the government. You also mentioned a little bit about the trust in or to the technology, that you can mention about human right trust or the system like trust. So in terms of ontology, have you ever considered to combine or elevate all these concepts into trusting technologies and data? Because in response to what Kenneth just mentioned, so data and technologies in relation to in context of political studies, it is not necessarily be neutral. So it's in a political and powers context. So you have to you may consider what is the data, to what extent is it related to privacy? Is that more subjective or objective? And who provides the data? What's the characteristic? What's the background of these people providing all these data? And how the data is stored? Where it's stored? And what organization is storing it and using it and owning the data. So particularly about the how the data is stored and used, the degree of transparency, and is there any possibility for the organization or for the entity to hide it or to conceal the data or to manipulate the data. So and also about the smart city, I think it is still at a very preliminary stage. So I'm talking about the future. There'll be introductions of the AI, the artificial intelligence. Then we will go into even deeper discussion about the human-slave structure debate. Yeah, this is my response. And thank you again very much. And it's very fruitful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mix. It's good to see that our alumni are closely involved in our proceedings. So that's brilliant. Can I start off with Professor Keverson with Jean-Pierre? I think in a way, if I say yes and no, that will sort of that will allow me a nice entry point. I think yes, of course, timing and trend. I mean, timing. It's interesting. There's a whole debate. Obviously, clearly, a whole history of surveys. There's never been an ideal time to do one, and in a sense, when we were doing this project, actually when I put the project in, it was in November 2019. It was actually at the height of the social movement, if you remember, but it was before the subsequent evolution that we know today. So, and that's actually quite interesting in the sense of the evolution of a project over time. So the project was conceptualized before the social movement really got kicked in. Then it was sort of approved, as you know, between November and November 19, January 2020. And then, of course, so in a sense, we got the money, we got the funding, hired the research assistants. Obviously, we're going to do the survey. As I'm not being purely instrumental about it, but I think it is actually quite interesting. Because in a sense, I think what we did in this survey was we were able to capture, particularly those questions about where people situate themselves politically and so on. We were genuinely able to capture, I think, some real dynamics in Hong Kong society. In relation, and I agree with what Mix is saying, I mean, in a way, some of the questions are about organisations rather than about data itself, but there are other questions that are very specific about data that we didn't talk about too much about confidentiality, about transparency, and all of that. But so I think in a way it's yes, you're right. You are right actually, in the sense that in an ideal circumstance this would have taken place in different circumstances, if you see what I mean. But I think what's the even more pertinent idea might be, and it sounds like a plea for funding, and it is, it's to say, well, what we now need is a time series, basically. So we need to redo this survey in 2 or 3 years' time, and we're going to do that, well, if they give me the money. And actually, Emily's points about the district councils were absolutely spot on, because in a way, what we're doing here is we're saying, I mean, obviously district councils don't really have much functions for smart cities, so it's just one of those questions that you ask because you're asking about all the institutions. But there's there's a variant of that question to be asked most certainly in the next time round. If we can do this, I think there's a sufficient sort of block of questions there to do a really quite nice sort of time series evolution. So in a sense, on timing and trend, I whether it was corrupted, I don't know, but it's certainly anyway. These were contaminated by the circumstances, undoubtedly. But it's still saying some interesting things, however. And maybe that survey, it might go down in time as being a sort of transition one, because it took place at a particular time in history. Can we do this survey again in the future? I don't know. Anyway, we just don't know. And then in relation to Mixer's points, I think they weren't addressed to me, but they were very good points actually about, and these are some other questions that are in the project, but not so much in the survey. And these are all about transparency, they're about storage, they're about ownership, they're about privacy, confidentiality, data storage. Kevin's disappeared, but he's particularly strong on that element of our project, Kevin. We're very much on the question of, I suppose, data trust, really. And that, so in a sense, that bit, that we and the whole ethics of this, and that's where Kevin's sort of contribution is to our project. So I certainly, those are very good questions, and you're quite right. I mean, as time evolves, these sort of questions have to evolve as well, because the technology is going so quickly. Sorry, that's a slightly long-winded response. Anyway, do you want to add anything you guys?
Well, maybe I say a little. So because so thank you very much for your comments. So but because now you talk about my part, so maybe I should respond a little bit. Now, basically, if you remember this one question that we asked in the PowerPoint, so people basically don't understand the essence of the smart city. So if you ask also whether do you know, so who use the data, through where they store it, they basically, so utterly they don't know. So they just answer purely based on their instinct, so I think so impression. So if you say now, of course, now if we do this research, so we also did some interviews, so we understand a little bit more. So where those things are stored, how are they treated? So we have a better sense of how the government is doing that, but people don't. Then so if we ask, so we are basically so that is why one indicator of proxy. So hopefully, so we capture the notion of trust. So in this, so that's the essence of the survey. So, but if we want to but maybe we should think about, so because we are also doing this mixed research in, so not only presenting so my part is about presenting the findings, but when we move on to the paper with the analysis, we bring into those interviewees the responses, so that we could try to get some more fruitful analysis, right? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Kenneth.
Can I ask a provocative question?
Go ahead.
Can there be a successful smart city in polity which doesn't really enjoy much trust? In other words, what means can the government and the government people do or take in order to push through those techs or technologies to achieve the smart city strategy or vision? For example, if the government could never really recover from a very low political a level of political support, can it just legislate, compel, force people to adopt and adapt accordingly to whatever they will introduce? Of course, and I'm not talking about res and other things, I'm not dealing with the political implications. I'm just thinking in terms of even our campus here. For example, we'll be asked to fill out those forms and then use the card to get in and out of campus. So obviously they didn't need much of our consent in the sense that we would consult us and prepare us and deliberate with us, or consider options and the diversity of views and assistance to those things, right? This is just a diktat imposed from above, and everybody followed. And then they could just go away and say, here we go for a very smart campus, for example. Would that be the case? I mean, I was trying to be gentle, assuming that our Hong Kong government still try very hard to win the hearts and minds of the people, and therefore I was proposing perhaps they should just go behind the veil, neutralizing it, to politicize it. Maybe they would stand a better chance to get those done. And now I'm thinking about that. Worst come to worst, because of the NSL and other accompanying measures, maybe they have given up that, and they've given up convincing and persuading people to let people buy in, and just push things down. How possible is that in the panel's opinion? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question. I mean, it's provocative, but it's a very good question. In a sense, it's I'll go back to timing and trend from Jean-Pierre, because in a way, what's interesting here is, I mean, hiding behind the veil of expertise is a good technocratic strategy, you know, an indirect form of steering at a distance and so on. So that makes sense, but it only makes sense if you need to some extent, to legitimize the policy. If you need to at least present the idea that the policy is joined up, the policy is negotiated, the policy is participatory, which a lot of the smart city policies do. Okay. But of course, the other strategy, and I was on a PhD thesis the other day at CTU about basically in mainland China and the use of smart city programs in mainland China. And clearly in the mainland, it's well, it varies actually depending on the city, because there's lots of different cities with different, you know, very different sort of. And Shenzhen is way ahead of most other places and so on. So there's clearly very many differences. But I suppose that these similar questions might not be posed in quite the same way as we asked them in our survey. I mean, it's a roundabout answer to your question. The NSL, well, maybe that is the paradigm shift, the critical juncture, or whatever we want to go back to. And maybe that's why, in a sense, the you know, the new sort of public discourse perhaps doesn't need quite so much to worry about questions like trust and so on.
I have another very simple, but maybe also provocative question. For your survey and the sample you selected, do you have an idea of the respective weight of the pro-establishment and the pro-democratic camp?
Yeah.
And if it really see any change, is it, you know, 55, 45? Does it reflect the result of the various elections?
We've got all those figures.
Yeah, the weight of the pro-democracy against the weight of the pro-establishment camp in your sample. Do you have any idea? Because I'm sure
No, I'm not sure if it's in this one. Well, it's in the electronic.
Idea of, you know, in 20,
I mean,
as we speak, in 20,
we've got all the answers to those
2021,
questions. We've got all. I mean,
has the pro-democracy camp, you know, gone down in terms of weight?
well, in a sense, what's interesting here is how, you know, I mean, we got these figures. We can look at the particular figure, but what was clearly the case here was that we are thinking already in this survey there were probably quite a few respondents who were not claiming that they were pro-democracy or localist, and so that probably underplayed to some extent the actual nature of the opinion. I mean, we have we've got it here. How do you identify yourself? It's in the Q13s. It's in our socio-demographic political ones. It's DM
9.
DM9, yeah.
Okay.
So
Pro-democracy camp 17%, pro-establishment camp 11%, localist camp 10%, centrist 32%. And the question is, what does that mean, really? And no political inclination 26%.
Oh, okay.
Don't know
Well,
4%.
guys.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
so
to some extent, what we're doing, we're accentuating the trend in these surveys, because clearly we're tending to put localist and pro-establishment, but they're only representing actually.
So pro-establishment is still lower than the pro-democracy. 17
Yeah.
versus
In this survey.
11.
In this survey, 11.
Yeah.
In this survey.
In this survey, so because should we say something about probably?
And if you
Yeah.
added the localists? No, if you added the localists.
If you add localist and pro-democracy in this survey, where are we?
Even doesn't say much.
I mean, there are clearly three clusters. There's the cluster that's localist pro-democracy. There's the centrist stroke not committed cluster.
Yeah.
And there's the pro-Beijing, if you like, or pro-establishment.
But I'm surprised. Pro-Beijing can be, I mean, declare pro-Beijing can be pretty small.
But it seems quite small in our survey. But the question was, which of the following best describes your political inclination? With a randomized presentation of the... And the choices were pro-democracy camp, pro-establishment camp, localist, centrist, no political inclination, politically neutral, don't know. And that was actually, we were guided actually by this survey company to express it in that particular way. That was the preference of the survey company.
maybe this is one of the last questions we asked in the telephone survey, right? So we don't choose the the telephone respondents based on the political inclination.
No, it's
Yeah,
random.
Yeah, it's random, yeah. And but by saying random, so people, I think people would know, so which company conduct the survey, and people would choose. So what I'm saying is that I suspect that the pro-establishment claim people would reject to do this kind of survey.
Oh, okay.
Because of the survey
There's a
association.
trend not to answer, so there will be less of them.
Yeah, there are some pro-establishment camp like polling firm, so they're doing something. So not necessarily the smart city survey. So
That's a very interesting point.
Yes, it's complicated.
But it's very hard to ascertain the point too.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
guessing that might be the reason.
But we could just put in the discussion. We can't say so.
Yeah,
This is the
we can't
case.
say for sure.
Yeah, that's hard. But this is like a claim that so that we could make. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I think that this is a fascinating discussion. I think we could maybe take a final round. Dion, do you have any questions?
Yeah, no.
Okay, good. But I mean,
I look, but there's nobody online.
there's no questions there, and I mean, I think we've had a good.
What's going to
Yeah, please.
happen next then with these after this very fine presentations that we've got this afternoon?
We have.
In terms of impact of you take it to see Terry Lab or something.
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, of course, let me just say in response to Jean-Pierre's question,
Sure.
the Impact Cafe was imagined as a genuine interactive moment where we come together with people and we'd have impact.
Right.
Now, it's actually a bit more difficult to imagine that today because we cannot easily come together with people.
Mm.
And we can have impact, but maybe not in the way that we originally framed it in this thing. What's going to happen is, well, a series of papers. I mean, we've got the
Okay.
we've got the special issue of China Perspectives on Trust in the Smart City, which is our project. And we've got 6 papers, very nice papers coming in. We've got Wilson, we've got Masuro, we've got various people coming in. So good papers. And then we're going to have Darren and I mean, the details is I'm working on one paper with Calvin, another one with Darren, another one with Dionysus, another one with Emily. So basically a lot's going to come out. But there are different, I mean, for example, Calvin's paper there, which is very, very specifically on that one aspect, but that's actually really fascinating. And trying to bring out that Hong Kong and the world sort of aspect, in the smart city world at least. It's a lot of interesting data in your paper, I think. And Calvin's entirely done that, I mean, the survey is, anybody's willing to work on it, by the way. It's a big survey, lots of questions. We're only just really starting to exploit it, actually. I think we're exploiting well the trust and technology questions, and we're exploiting quite well the international ones. We're not doing quite so much on the characteristic trust, but we'll get there, And the whole smart city bit, there's going to be another article on that, because there's a whole series of questions about, not so much about trust, but very much about smart city. So very much about the qualities and the defects of the smart city. What's the role of the smart city? Does it bring decision making closer to people, for example? Does it help participation? Does it save money? Does it make people more efficient? Does it, so all of those questions, and the questions about the usage of particular apps, not just the governmental apps, but so there's quite a lot of stuff about, there's real smart city stuff in there that we will also try and exploit in another article. But as you know, it takes time. But I think we're quite nicely digesting the survey. It's taken a while. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming along, and thank you Dion for managing the questions, and thank you.